morning. My name is Leslie Hendrickson. Thank you so much for being here for our virtual day. This is our first hybrid festival. We were back in real life for the first time since the pandemic yesterday in Newburyport, Massachusetts, which, if you don't know, is on the North Shore, about 40 miles north of Boston. We had a really great day, and we're excited to be back with a full day of online programming for our hybrid festival. Our founding sponsors are the Institute for Savings and the Newburyport Bank. They have been with us since 2005, and we so appreciate their support. We've also received funding from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, as well as local chapters in Newburyport, Newbury, West Newbury, Georgetown, Raleigh, and Salisbury. Thank you so much to those organizations, and also the Yellow School and the Mass Center for the Book. We also are partnered with two independent bookstores, the Bookshop of Beverly Farms and Jabberwocky Bookshop here in Newburyport. And now I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists. This includes Lane Moore, who is an award-winning comedian, writer, actor, and musician. She is the former sex and relationships editor at Cosmopolitan, where she received the GLAAD Award for her groundbreaking work, expanding the magazine's queer coverage. Her first book is the highly praised How to Be Alone, and she lives in New York City. Christie Tate is the Chicago-based writer and essayist. Her work has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, Pithead Chapel, McSweeney's, Motherwell, Child, and others. Her debut memoir, Group, published in October 2020, was a Reese's Book Club pick and a New York Times bestseller. Will Schwalbe is the author of Books for Living, Send, co-written with David Shipley, The End of Your Life Book Club, which was a #1 Indie Next pick, and Entertainment Weekly Best Book of the Year. And he spent the book spent more than 4 months on the New York Times bestseller list. His most recent book is We Should Not Be Friends, The Story of Friendship, and that was published in February. And our moderator is Meredith Goldstein, and she is an author, journalist, and longtime advice columnist at the Boston Globe. Her books include the YA novels Things That Grow and Chemistry Lessons, and the novel The Singles, and the memoir Can't Help Myself, Lessons and Confessions from a Modern Advice Columnist, which is based on her Love Letters column. Thank you so much, Meredith. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. These are great numbers I'm seeing at the bottom of my screen, so thank you for curling up with us on a Sunday. I just want to start by thanking the festival and also sharing one note, which is that when I was asked to moderate this panel on friendship and books on friendship, I reached out to Lane, who has been on the Love Letters podcast and who I've long been a fan of, and who I got to spend time with in person years ago. And I said, oh my gosh, we are so lucky. We're going to spend a beautiful day in Newburyport, one of the cutest towns ever. It was actually my first job at the Boston Globe before I was an advice columnist, was covering local news in Newburyport. And Lane politely emailed back, I believe this panel is virtual. So I would just like to say that if you do not live there and you happen to get the chance to go to Newburyport and do this festival in person, as I did yesterday, go on an off weekend, go on a festival weekend, what a wonderful place to be. So we are all in spirit in Newburyport today.
To be fair, I was disappointed I couldn't be there with you. I was so I looked adorable to me too. I don't think we get to go this year.
I really sold it, and now it's virtual. So thank you to the festival for putting this together. I just want to start with a very basic, I know some people have read these books and some people have not had the chance to get their hands on them yet. Why don't we go in the order of Lane and Will and then Christie. Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure. So my book is called You Will Find Your People, How to Make Meaningful Friendships as an Adult. And so much of this, it's my second book, and my first book focused on loneliness and trying to be okay with being alone and actually find some joy in there and find comfort in solitude and getting to know yourself and really kind of laying the foundation for being better at connecting with other people. And this book was really, I wanted to have better friends. I wanted to have the friends that were promised to me in pop culture for my entire life. That when I grew up, I have 5 people I saw every single day at the same coffee shop, and we would all hang out and we all lived a block away. Like, I wanted this, and I, was having a lot of friendships that weren't necessarily working or weren't necessarily healthy, or they were getting everything that they needed and I wasn't. And I really wished that there was a guide that we had been given at, 13, maybe even younger, about how to set boundaries, attachment styles, love languages, all of these things and how to break up with a friend, how to know if a friendship really isn't good. And I wanted to write that guidebook, as well as a book that explores all of the weird amounts of shame that we're carrying for not having these friendships that are really hard actually to get, and the shame that so many of us have for not being able to have met our best friends at 14 and continue to know them until we're 85. I think we just have really, really high standards. So I wanted to write this book that was so many of my own stories, and also actual things that people could do, lessons people could take away. Yeah, kind of a hybrid of those things that would hopefully help people find more connection in their lives.
All right, am I up next, Meredith?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And also, just quickly before I start, just a couple shout outs. I'm a Massachusetts kid, so even though I'm virtual, I feel like I'm home. And also, I've had the joy of being IRL at the Newburyport Festival, and it's just the best. So maybe someday in the future. And final shout out is the joy I have with being on with Lane and Christie, because I've read both of their books, and I'm nuts about these books. So it's really an honor. So, We Should Not Be Friends, The Story of a Friendship, starts in the early 80s. I was an out gay, bookish, classic student at Yale. I was drawn into a secret society, which was the 15 most different kids at Yale, all put together, have to have dinner twice a week for an entire year, and have to give a presentation of everything that you've experienced in your entire life. And it was co-ed and all different kinds of kids. That was its point, the 15 most different kids. And I got there, and all of the other kids, I thought, wow, I could be friends with these people. And there was one kid who was a loud, obnoxious frat boy type, a nationally ranked wrestler. And I just thought, hell no, not this kid. I'm just going to steer a wide berth. And his name was Chris Maxey. I was a burgeoning AIDS activist. He was on his way to becoming an officer in the Navy SEALs. And the book is about our 40-year friendship, and how he's changed my life, and how I've come to love him like a brother, and he me. And if I would say there's a point to the book, because I do think books should have points, or can have points, it's that he was definitely prejudiced against me, but I was way more prejudiced against him. And I really believe that we can be friends with a much broader range of people than we might imagine. Not everyone. You have to share values, but I hope this book will encourage people to widen their friendship circles a bit.
Okay, I'm up. I too am so grateful to be here. I love both the books by Lane and Will, and so this is a huge honor. And thank you, Meredith, for getting us kicked off and moderating this panel. And my book is BFF, a memoir of friendship lost and found. I was in the position where I came to be 33 years old, and I'd spent the past almost 2 decades trying to straighten myself out romantically. And all my energy was sort of wrapped up in, where's my partner? Why am I always dating alcoholic men who have hygiene issues? And I was so consumed that I didn't put any effort into friendship, nothing significant. And then all of a sudden I met my person and I settled down, and I looked around and I was like, oh my God. And somebody approached me. I was in recovery, long-term recovery. And there's no recovery program just for friendship, but maybe there should be, is what I'm thinking. Or maybe we can just read Lane and Will in my book, and we can get where we need to go. But a friend of mine in a recovery program, she's not a person I would have chosen. She was 20 years older than I was. She seemed way more spiritual. She actually was way more spiritual. And she like tapped me on the shoulder as soon as I stopped crying about all the boys and men who had broken my heart. And she said, maybe you want to start looking at your friendships. And I wanted to say, can I just be a bride? Can I just coast for a little while? But the minute she offered the invitation, I felt the calling, like, oh God, okay, let's do it. Let's do this work. I'd done enough work on other issues, daddy issues, mommy issues, husband issues. I knew it wasn't going to be like a quick fix. But what I also didn't know is that so many friendships would come back to me that I had heartbrokenly, I'd been a ghost. I hadn't really, I had probably been ghosted, but I wasn't really paying attention. But I had definitely had friendships that had been broken and let go of prematurely that were haunting me. And what I didn't know is that there are things that you can do. There were things that I could do. The miracle of this book for me, or the experience for me, was that I had a friend. She wasn't a therapist. I didn't have to pay her. Both of us just discovered something in each other. We wanted to get better at friendship and to let go of the narrative that we just sort of suck at friendship and we'll have jobs and partners and live and just live out 2/3 of a life. And the book is the story of what we did and how we were able to mend the parts of us, mostly by letting go of the narrative that we couldn't do it and by facing our wrongs and moving forward through that together.
This is great. Reading, I want to also recommend that for those who have not read these books, they make an incredible book club pick as a trio.
Yeah.
So do these together. So Lane touched on the issue of pop culture a little bit, and I'm very guilty in writing an advice column. Somebody wrote to me once and said, Meredith, you often recommend after breakups that people spend a lot of time with friends and look to friends, and not all of us make friends easily and maintain them. And it was sort of a friend privilege I did not realize I had. And of course, for me, romantic relationships are much more difficult to maintain and find. And it really woke me up. And I thought a lot about how I modeled my life after a lot of what was on TV when I was growing up. And some of what I had did match, some didn't. And I wonder, for each of you, to talk about when you were young and sort of building community in whatever way you built it, what were you consuming that might have told you what a friendship should look like, media-wise? I don't know, we'll go backwards and go the other way. Christie, do you want to start?
Sure. One of the things that I had internalized, possibly starting like at Little Women when I was probably in grammar school. I probably watched the movie first. I thought, well, your first best friend is your sister, and you're supposed to be super tight with your sister, and that is the model for which all friendships will grow. And I didn't have that type of intimacy with my sister for a variety of reasons, but that already made me feel like I was behind the ball. And then you start seeing the ways that, the best friend books, like there was a series of books I read, they were about these roommates and we all just devoured them. And they were just, so I had the idea from the books and then also from, I guess, also TV, like, like the facts of life. You are just like, if you are a girl and you are the right kind of successful girl, you have the valence for immediate, intimate friendship that's healthy. And somewhere along the way, I got the idea that you should have your best friends and your mom should all be best friends. And there should be this just glommy, amorphous, just like barbecues all the time. And my parents weren't very social. And I had a ton of secrets. So I was not emotionally available starting at like age 6. So I definitely had those ideas and it was a huge burden. And I love that Lane said the word shame, because I had the shame of not having that. I remember having it in first grade. So it starts really, really young.
Yeah.
So my pop culture references, I just turned 60 years old and grew up at a time when, as a young gay kid, there were absolutely no gay figures on television. The only gay figures in any popular culture that appeared either died at their own hand or wound up doing someone else in, basically. And so I was very lucky. I always had a best friend, and I jokingly described us as indoor kids because we would sit around and listen to records and watch television. And but the thing that I picked up from popular culture was that jocks were terrifying, and that there was this whole species, whether it was on the Brady Bunch when Marcia wants to get was it Marcia or Jan? Marcia, who wants to get a date with the football hero. I always had this sense you must never show people who you really are. You must keep your personality secret and stay the heck away from the jocks because they will do you harm. And those two things really determined how I approached friendship all the way through graduation of high school, which is when I came out. But just as a brief shout out to representation, boy, is it important in modeling not just who we can be as people in society, but who we can have as friends. And I just recently watched a show called Heart something. I can't remember.
Heartstopper.
Yes.
Heartstopper.
So adorable. And I'm so happy that things like that are on pop culture now.
Yeah. I deeply struggled with friendship. I had the palpable envy even now that I had when Will was like, I always had a best friend. I literally like felt like a knife in my heart, just like, and I'm so glad you had it. But again, it's even as an adult, you're like, oh, that would have changed everything. I was so alone as a kid. And I had, and I'm assuming because, Christie only said so much, but for me, I raised myself. I was in an extreme of aloneness. And so I had the added shame and weight of definitely not having friends in my family and really growing up in a really volatile environment. And then the pressure was really on. If you don't have that at home and your home life's really rough, then you go to school and you're like, somebody here, please like me, please be nice to me, please be kind to me. And then you're getting bullied there too. I was really there was no safe place for me. And I, interestingly, I think was very emotionally available, but I learned very quickly that I wasn't supposed to be. I was supposed to be like the right kind of emotionally available. I was supposed to be cool. All the other kids were cool. Wow. They didn't need friends. They didn't, they were just able to have them, and it was just easy for them. And so, and yet at the same time, I grew up watching and reading Anne of Green Gables, and the Babysitter's Club was very popular, and all of these books about these girls who were friends. And I remember trying to start, and also, I grew up in like the 90s, 2000s. So like witches were very popular. So in my first book, I talk about trying to form a coven. And obviously I was bi. I think that's implied by the fact that I'm talking about covens. We've only been a few minutes into this. So, also having, and then also keeping the secret of like, I feel like I'm a little bit different than these other kids. And also watching, seeing Anne of Green Gables, reading Anne of Green Gables, and being like, I think these girls are in love. I want a friendship where we're kind of in love. And then you enter into these friendships and you're like, oh, we're kind of in love, but like, that's not okay to be yet. And so like, you hate me. Like I had a lot of friendships where like they had crushes on me and they hated me for it. They was like, I had done something wrong. And it was just like, so just bumping up against all these things and then kind of looking at, what am I doing wrong? I must be doing something wrong because all these people in pop culture have it easily. But it was so funny because I looked at Anne of Green Gables and I identify so much with Anne. I was a super romantic little kid. I just like loved people and I wanted to know their stories, and I would go door to door and ask people like, what are you cooking? How long have you been married? Like I was a super like just wanted connection little kid. And everywhere I went, I just felt like people were just like, what is wrong with you? Like it took so long for people to kind of catch up to that, because I think you were supposed to be a certain type of little kid in order to get friends, is the message that I received. And even though I might have been like some of these kids on TV, I couldn't find the other little kids like that who wanted it.
I have so many questions. I just want to remind everybody, because I'm sure you do too, you can drop your question into the Q&A area anytime, and I'm going to get to audience questions. So if something occurs to you, you can drop it in now and not save it. I'm going to ask Christie and Will a question, and then I've got a Lane question. But the two of you have really created a beautiful portrait of a relationship of a person who's special to you, and in turn tell me a ton about you. It's really, you tell me so much about yourself based on this inner monologue about one important person in your life. And anybody who writes like this feels a great responsibility, I know, to do right by this person. And I want to know what your process was. Both of you were in sort of different places about this person, and who did you access for help? Who read drafts? Who was your checks and balances, even internally, to make sure you were telling the right story about a person? And I don't know, Christie, do you want to start just talking about that and the responsibility that comes with writing about someone you love?
Sure, it is a huge responsibility, and I don't take that lightly. I'm sure no writer does. And the in my story, my friend was Meredith, and that's actually not her real name, but she's Meredith to all of us. And she had passed away. That's, I mean, you know that on the first page of the book, so it's not a spoiler. And I felt this huge responsibility, and also she can't speak for herself. And one of the blessings I got from her before she died was she was like, keep writing. And I'd already started to write about her and what she'd meant to me, and the work we'd done together in transforming each other's lives. And I told her that. So I feel so grateful that we had some of those conversations before, but that doesn't mean I'm off the hook by any means. And there were a lot of places where I wanted to be sure that she didn't seem inhuman and so saintly that it's covering up her humanity. But I also didn't want to betray her trust, which is the line I was walking. And there were things that I would run by. We had some mutual friends. So I would run certain facts about her. I would run them by other friends. Like, I don't think she would care about that, or wherever the ethical dilemma was. Like, she happened to have a very intense hang up about one of her features. And I was just like, I just can't write about that. I don't care who gives me permission. I can't do it. And there were some medical things because she had a medical illness and it was protracted. And I was like, do I have to get all of this right? Like, or like, some of it I felt I did, and I would reach out to her husband, but also her surviving husband also, but I didn't want to be like, knock, knock, knock. Can we talk about the breast reconstruction? Like, I didn't want to burden him with my faulty memory. So there was a lot of like walking the fine line between deciding, right, what do I owe readers? What do I owe the story? What do I owe Meredith? And if something felt too hot and also unnecessary to the reader, then I just let it go. Because if it didn't serve the story, then I didn't need to upend other people's lives to fact check myself. So it was not easy. And I look forward to hearing what Will has to say, because his friend is still living.
So I will have to say, Christie, when I read your book there, it has such candor in it and such frankness, but also I did get a sense of love and generosity, and somehow that comes through. So, or definitely comes through. So with mine, so Chris Maxey went on to found an extraordinary school in the Bahamas called the Island School, and he's a hero to generations of kids who have gone there. And he's a hero to me too. The book started actually as a biography of him. And it was my marvelous editor, Sunny Mehta, who said, I think the book you want to write is about your friendship. So I decided that when I was done, I would show him the entire book, him and his wife, Pam, and their kids. I had spent weeks in the Bahamas with him, reconstructing our lives. He shared with me his journals, everything. And I said to him, you have carte blanche to take out anything you want. And if you lost faith in the project, we'll just kill it and I'll pay the money back. That no book is more important than a friendship. And he read it, and I was really nervous. And he said, I just want you to change one thing if you want. And I said, what's that? And he said, look, I know we drank a lot, but I am head of a school. And can you please just take a little bit of the drinking? So I honestly took out 2/3 of the drinking, and people still read it and they're like, my God, you drank a lot. So that was it. And then everybody who's in it, all the members of the secret society, I showed them the portions that concerned them, and they had the option of not being in it without their real name, or their real name, and everyone chose their real name. So there are no changed names in this book.
With your book in particular, Will, I wondered how long you thought, if your friend wrote a book about your friendship, how long do you think that book would be?
That's a very interesting way of putting it. I actually think it would be a totally different book. It would be such a fascinating thing. But
and for those who have not read, these are two so different people, as Will said, and so lovely. And I was reminded of Saturday Night Live recently did a two sketches. One was about having a straight male friend, like you should get one, and there's and it's obviously super generalized, and another one was sort of taking a straight male partner to a dog park to meet other man friends, and it just these moments of the expectations for socialization for men being so different depending on the man and gender. I do want to get to gender, but I imagine it would be shorter.
Those are right. Those sketches were spot on, I thought. I love those sketches. And also just one funny thing. So Maxie was very comfortable telling me he loved me long before I was able to say it to him for reasons of shame and all sorts of things. But the publisher originally proposed that we publish the book on Valentine's Day. And I said, he is a Navy SEAL. Maybe that's pushing it a little far.
So, Lane, I want to talk to you about two things about the internet.
Okay.
So one, I've read Lane's book, both of them, and when you are online, when you are a person online, you just make assumptions about someone. And Lane, you're incredibly good at being online. I mean, you have a live show that involves an online experience, with dating. And so I would have never guessed before reading all of this that you were someone who struggled with this. And I wonder to some extent whether when one is good online and so good socializing, if that can also give people the signal that you're not, even when you have tweeted or posted that this is something you need, I still imagine that this is something that is easier for you. So that's the first question for you, one of two about the internets.
Sure. I think it's so funny. It's so funny to hear you say that, but because I think the perfect parallel there is, so when I reached out to various people to blurb the book, the people who I reached out to were Rachel Bloom, who, crazy ex-girlfriend, like very good at the internet, very good at TV, every single thing that she does, music, every single thing. Abby Jacobson, I'm the biggest fan of Broad City. Literally, I opened the book with a Broad City quote, she's literally the model for friendship. Judy Greer literally has played everybody's best friend in every movie ever. And there was some part of me that worried they were going to read this book and go, I really loved it. I've never struggled with friendship and I don't understand this, you genuine freak, but this is a really great book. Like I had, and yet every single one of them was like, I have struggled with this my entire life. I felt like I couldn't talk about how I have struggled with it. This book meant so much to me. And I say that because as you're sitting there, like looking at me being like, I never would have guessed she would struggle with friendship. The people that I reached out to blurb this, I was like, oh, of course I struggle with it. There's no way they haven't. But I think that speaks to this larger idea that was so much of why I wanted to write this book, because we are all assuming that everyone has it under control. Everyone is so good at friendship and we are bad at it. Or, maybe if somebody is really good at friendship, they assume everybody's like has an easy time with friendship. And it's just so incorrect. And I know the other thing is too, a lot of the time when you say you struggle with friendship, there is this unspoken idea that like, oh, it must be because you're like deeply unlovable or you're like really difficult or whatever. And with all the people that I, talk to, these heroes of mine, I know that's not why they struggle with friendship. The reasons why I struggle with my friendships, it's not because I had trouble finding people who liked me. That's not it. And I don't think that's it for most of us. It's not like that, but we're still operating on these ideas from childhood that like if you didn't have friends as a kid, it's because you were weird, it's because you were mean and weird and smelled bad. But as an adult, that's not why we struggle with friends. We struggle with friendships because one of the biggest reasons that I struggled with friendships as a kid is I didn't know who I could go to with the truth. I didn't know who I could go to with the full entirety of my being. I remember I'm a comedian as well as an author. And I was very funny as a kid, you know, like most comedians and funny people, because I loved it and because of coping. But I remember a very such a flashbulb moment in high school of telling my friends, you know, gathering around me in the morning. They would always gather around for like my funny stories, like what happened last night, like I know something crazy happened. And I remember saying to my friend, like, actually, like last night was really rough, like I don't really have anything like that funny. It was just kind of, and I started to talk about it, and I left a door open for them to like meet me there. And I remember hearing my friend go, oh, okay, well, if you don't have any funny stories, like, we'll just see you later. And I remember just being like, oh, I am only allowed to be the funny friend. I can never show pain. I can never show vulnerability. I can never struggle with my mental health. And that is something, they had no empathy. They didn't care at all. They really didn't care what happened to me. They wanted me to be funny. If I was really in crisis, whatever. She's not funny. She's of no use to us. And I think that even though that sounds, you know, that's so specific, I think that's something I've struggled with a lot in my friendships. Like, where can I go and be seen in totality? Where can I go? And because so many of the friendships that were shown, you're supposed to be like, how are you? Good, good, good. Oh, we're going to go get cocktails. Oh my God, I know. Men, right? Like, we're supposed to have this really ridiculous surface level. I never wanted friendship like that. I wanted this deep, intimate friendship where I could have a bad day. I could struggle with, you know, my brain's a little bit different than other people's brains. I'm going through a hard time, but all the friendships I saw around, like no one, that wasn't allowed, and everyone was fine that it wasn't allowed. And I was never fine that it wasn't allowed. And so one of my biggest struggles with friendships has always been like finding people with genuine empathy, finding people who can actually talk to you, like hold space for you is rare. People who you don't talk about something painful and they just go, yeah, that sucks. So tomorrow I'm going to like it's so common. So, you know, so much of what I want this book to do is show people that, because I felt like I was doing something wrong because I couldn't have that. But I think so many of us are like, oh, a lot of these friendships are a little like, I want a little more out of these. Are we allowed to have it? I think we are. Yeah.
This question really is about, you know, I think all of these books ask a question of how hard is this supposed to be? And I think there's a lot of messages about romantic relationships and marriage and long-term romance being difficult, and there are ups and there are downs, and you spend a life together, and what does this mean? And right now, when I go on social media, so this is an internet adjacent question, there are a lot of messages. I think even if I don't follow these accounts, probably based on the fact that I'm a 45-year-old straight cis woman, they're like advertising at me. One card will say, you know, you need to cord cut people who are toxic to you. And the next one will be like, a true friend gets through everything. And I'm like, well, what is it? Do I break up with my friend? Do I stay with them forever? Is it abusive? Is it perfect? Is it? And there are many moments. And you know, Will, you've written a book that involves decades of ups and downs and weirds. And there's a beautiful moment in your book where you talk about sort of finding out that your friend thought about the AIDS crisis and where you were at the time and was scared, like, and didn't talk about it really. It was sort of, and the things we don't talk about. And so I am constantly wrestling with how hard is this supposed to be? And the longer we have someone in our lives, the harder it is. So I think all of you can speak to this. I don't know, maybe we'll start with Will and go around of just in writing what you wrote and in experiences, how do you decide for yourself which of these external messages to bring into your friendship lives, and how to embrace the difficulty of friendship while knowing you could let go? It's a big one.
It's such a wonderful question. And I feel so moved when I was listening to Lane, because I'm 180 degrees the opposite, which comes with its whole set of problems as well, which is I grew up with this, they called it the best little boy in the world syndrome, based after a book called The Best Little Boy in the World, which is no one will notice I'm gay if I'm the best little boy in the world. I do everything. I run for class president, and I'm friends to everybody and remember everyone's birthday and hide in plain sight. because I know if people find out this one thing about me, it'll destroy my life. It'll blow up everything. And so my 40-year friendship with Maxie, how the long-term friendship, and in terms of that dichotomy that you just spoke about, the biggest problem in our friendship, the thing that almost derailed it, is I loved being the person who was always there for him. When he had a brain tumor, I was there for him. When his marriage was falling apart, it got put back together, I was there for him. And I was in late life diagnosed with a chronic illness, and I didn't tell him. And he blew up at me. It's the only time, one of the only times he's ever really gotten mad at me in our friendship. And Lane, you have something great about like the big argument with your friend and what an important thing that is. And this was really important. And he said that he was really hurt that I hadn't shared with him what I was going through. And so my sort of takeaway from that, from our 40-year friendship, is that I really do believe the biggest gift you can give a friend is to allow them to help you. And that, when I allowed him to do that, that took our friendship to a different level.
Christie, can you speak to this?
Sure. I have found, and I know exactly what you're talking about, the sort of like dizzying experience of like 7 messages. Viola Davis says support other women, but then this really eminent psychiatrist is like, cut the cord. I've had that. And I have discovered that for me, because I have finally accepted and embraced and celebrated that friendship is as dynamic and intimate as my marriage or my eating, I really can't take advice off Instagram about my friendships. And when I get to a place where I'm like, is it supposed to be this hard? And I have a very low tolerance for pain. So I get to that place often. I really do. And what I have found for myself is I get to that place when I am not speaking up, when I'm not asking for what I need, and I am somehow, some way, I have stuffed a need or my voice. I have somehow stifled myself, and that's the quickest way for me to want to vaporize from a relationship, and that is 100% on me, because my friends can't decide what is it she's not telling me I should ask about. That's my work to do. And when I hit those moments with friendships, I hope that I get enough support from all my other friends or therapy or my husband or my own internal process where I'm willing to see where have I silenced myself such that I can have that conversation, and then I can start to make decisions about how close, how far, but it's not something that I can put on an Instagram flyer. Like, it's a deep, complex, confusing thing. Even to this day, for all the work I've done and all the healing, I still find myself confused more often than I wish. And I sort of just want to say, like, I think the work is never done. And I may be asking those questions for, like, sometimes I feel shame that I'm asking the question, like, why can't I just get on board and be a good friend? Like, it's just much more complicated than I wish it were. But that also means that the rewards are more nuanced and complex as well. So I think not getting advice from the internet is probably my best first strategy.
Unless you are reading my advice column.
Of course, yeah.
I'm kidding. Very, very broad advice there. Wait, Christie, I have another question for you, which is that years before COVID, so sometime, let's say 2018, I'm just going to guess, Ada Calhoun came out with a book. I think it was called Why We Can't Sleep. It was about Gen X women, and yeah. And I think a lot of people felt strongly about it. And I went to hear her speak in Boston, and somebody in the audience was like, oh, like, well, is there no hope for women of a certain generation who have sort of been trapped in their own whatever? I recommend reading the book. And she sort of said this as a very afterthought comment, but she said, well, from my reporting, a lot of people in multi-generational friendships find a great deal of joy. And then she had to move on to the next point. And I was like, wait, what? And I happen to be very lucky to have some friends who are about 10 years younger, and then some who are many years older. And I wanted to know, in reading your book also, even when the age gap it could be many different ways, like what role do you think that plays in bonding, in teaching, in, I thought about that in your book in particular, and to some extent all of your books, but when someone brings a different time of life to the experience, what that is like.
Yeah, I do think that is a very special dynamic. In my case, Meredith was 20 years older and she'd passed through milestones and lived to tell about them. But what was really, really instructive and healing for me was to see, okay, she's 50, I'm 30, and we do actually have a lot of the same problems. And so there were so many moments where like our musical references were totally off. Like she's like all about Cher, Barry Manilow. Like, whoa. And I'm like, have you ever heard of what's his like, have you ever heard of U2? You know, so that part could be fun, but like when we got down to the heart of it, there were the places where we overlapped were extremely healing, but she also had 20 years of experience on me of you know, she had 20 years more mess, you know, in some ways that she was trying to clean up. So it was sort of in some ways an incentive to sort of like, I can do this work now at 30, or I can do it at 50. And how many more people will be in the graveyard, my friendship graveyard, if I want to forestall this work? So there were lots of like lessons on the go and living lessons that she wasn't like didactically teaching me, but I could see them because she opened up her life and I could see, oh, I can be vital and change for the rest of my life. That was the biggest lesson.
That's really interesting. And by the way, people, just a reminder to drop questions in if you have it into the Q&A, not in the chat, and I will get to them. But yesterday when I was at the festival in person and I went to a panel on books about Maine, authors talked about the geography of Maine and how they were different. And it occurred to me in that moment that geography actually plays quite a role in all of your experiences with friendships. And I wondered if you could all speak to that, maybe starting with Lane, just about, you know, there are people probably in this virtual room who are in suburban, rural places, people who are lonely in New York City, which is a feeling I know many people are familiar with when everyone's around you and no one is around. In terms of your friendship life, how has your external geographic world played into what you've experienced? Lane, do you want to start?
I think so. It's so funny because I've had people ask like, oh, do you think this is just in New York? This is just in big cities? And I'm like, I don't know, that's not what you're asking, but I'm like, are you kidding? Like, because there's this idea that like, oh, it must be this. Oh, I know what it was. I did a show the other day and somebody called in and was like, oh, I'm from the Midwest, we're more direct. And I'm like, I wanted to ask like a follow-up, like, do you never have problems with your friendships because you're more direct? Like, I don't think that's it. I don't think there's any, you know, speaking to what we were talking about with the internet of this oversimplification. Like, I think there's this idea that like, oh, that this is only happening because of this one thing. Like, are you kidding me? I think it's really global. And part of that, I know for a fact from being somebody who tours a lot as a comedian. And I really thought I was going to go to these other cities and they were going to be like, I don't ever have problems with dating. It's actually great here. Everyone's super nice in this city. And instead, when I went on tour, everyone was like, oh no, it's awful here. It's awful. And so there's this idea that like, oh, well, that just happens in New York because New York's crazy, or that just happens in these big cities. No, because look, like we're all being asked to work a million hours at work. We don't have any free time. The free time we're supposed to have is supposed to go to your partner because we don't value friendships as much. That's supposed to take care of itself. Who cares? And then we have to go and like unload the dishwasher and do laundry. Like there's so few time that we have allotted ourselves as people for community and to develop community. And so people are tired. And then you know, you add to the fact that so many adults, you know, we are combinations of everything that has happened to us and are, you know, we don't want to, so many people don't want to be vulnerable again. We don't want to start all over again, so to speak. We don't want to have to build a friendship from the ground up. But again, that's the only way to really get to that. So I think that it's something that I don't feel that it's specifically tied to that. I think it's very funny that you can be living in a city with millions of people and still feel like, where are my people in all of this? It's almost more frustrating. But then I also know, as somebody who grew up in a small town, that has its own challenges because you're like, well, I can be friends with 4 people and none of them are it. So, you know, you have 2 polarities where is it better to have to make do with like, there's only so many people in this town, or to have seemingly all the options in the world and still realize that you know, you're going to have to develop a better relationship with yourself. You're going to have to examine who you're attracting. You're still, I think no matter where you live, you're still going to have to do the work.
I'm just going to jump into that question because now, of course, all of you are writing your questions now that we have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to, this is a question for Christie. I'm wondering if your friendship with Meredith had elements of hierarchy due to age and experience differences.
Yeah, I tried really hard to get a hierarchy going because I'm more comfortable in hierarchy. I like relationships where I have to pay or be paid because I don't have to be as vulnerable if it's a transaction. So with Meredith, I kept trying to make her my sponsor, and she kept saying, no, no, we're doing this. We're shoulder to shoulder. And I realized I felt so much more vulnerable being just a friend. There's no security in just being a friend. You don't have to have friends. Like if I was her sponsor, she'd have an obligation to her recovery to help me. And so I kept trying to put it there and she kept trying to take it away. And that's because it's more vulnerable just to be a friend. That was my experience.
This is a question, okay. And by the way, someone in the questions asks if we can put the names of the books in the chat, which is a great idea. If somebody can do that for me, that would be wonderful. Get them at independent bookstores like Jabberwocky. There's a question. I know Lane touched on loving friends too much at a young age, and I often think myself that friendships can be an even stronger, more intense relationship than romantic partnerships seem to be. Do you all agree, or do you have a defined line between friendship versus relationship?
I'll start, I guess. You know, for me, I think because I don't have that familial foundation, I don't have that. There was a want for what I was promised from people that, you know, who didn't have strong familial relationships. They were like, well, my friends are my family. My friends are my real family. And I'm like, that sounds great. Again, how do we get that? I agree with you. Where's the path? So I love that, you know, the friends that I have now, you know, the love is so deep there, and it is, you know, and it's a double-edged sword, right? Because to have that deep, deep love, if it goes away, if it ends, it's like losing a family member, it's like losing a partner. But again, I would rather risk that. I would rather have a friend who I love that deeply, can count on that deeply, adore that deeply. Like, you know, some of the stories that I tell about my current friends, there really are love letters to my friends because it took me so long to find them. And I do love them very deeply. So I don't think there has to be fine lines drawn if both people are comfortable with it.
That's super great. I know we just have about 2 minutes left. And so I'm just going to ask a quick general question from someone here. Is it better to have a lot of friends or just a few close ones? I can guess Will's answer. Oh, wait, Will, you're on mute.
Whoops. I think that the answer to that is, and again, this is something Lane touched on, which I really loved. This word friends covers everybody from your best friend in the entire world to someone who just friended you on Facebook. And I think they're different things. I love having a lot of friends and old friends, and it is qualitatively different than the couple of people who are my best friends. So I think it's best to have both.
All right, I think we have to wrap up. I just want to say, again, buy all 3 of these books. I had so much fun reading them. I cried a bit, I laughed a lot, and they make such a wonderful trio for any book club. And thank you to the festival for making sure I read them, and I hope you get them too.
Thank you all so much for being here. This was really great, amazing conversation. And even though we had, some people are saying we wish it were longer. And even though there were a lot of difficult things to talk about, it was still funny and very engaging. So thank you very much, everyone. I did put the book titles, or at least the first parts, in the chat. So you can check those out. And thank you all again, and take care, everyone.
Thank you.